This show talks about books that feature mental health and mental illness topics. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Jill Johnson Young, who wrote the book, The Rebellious Widow. Hi, Jill.
Hello, how are you?
Hi. Good. Good morning. How are you?
I am good and I'm awake.
Yeah, me too. Got my cup of coffee. So before we get started, I'd like my guest to introduce himself. So is there anything you'd like to say about like who you are, what you do?
I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have spent more than a decade in hospice. I've spent even more time than that in private practice now in Riverside and Murrieta at Central Counseling Services. And I write books about grief and loss. I have some for children. I have a workbook for the grown-ups. And now I have a new book called The Rebellious Widow, as you mentioned, which is all about how you get through the loss of an intimate partner or anyone else really, the whole process, and then how to get through the grief process and get to the other side, because I am solution focused to the core. I'm a social worker, even more to the core. And between those two things, it's about doing the work and getting to the other side. I also happen to be widowed twice. My first wife died after 23 years, Linda, of pulmonary fibrosis. My second wife was her hospice nurse, Casper. Yes, we have a friendly ghost who was a hospice nurse. And they became very close friends while Linda was dying. And before Linda died, she said, "You need to marry Casper." And I said, "You need to stop." And this is not Fantasy Island, for those of you who are old enough to remember that show. And it turns out she was right. So I married Casper, much to the chagrin and other reactions of some people. And then Casper developed Lewy body dementia, which is what Robin Williams had and why he took his life. And then I married Stacy, the mortician, who took care of both of them and helped take care of Casper. So yeah, I'm a little dangerous to be married to, but so far we've made it to 7 years. So I think we're clear.
That's
Yeah.
great.
How's that for an intro? Not
I
many
know, right?
people can say that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And love the book. Love the title. What's the title about? Can you tell me?
You know, when I was widowed the first time, another LCSW, who's a friend of mine, called me and she said, "All right, we need to go have coffee. You need to understand there are widow rules." I said, "What is a widow rule?" And she said, "Well, you're about to find out because they're going to be laid all over you and you're not going to be expecting them. So I'm going to warn you because widows need to pay it forward." So those who are widows listening and those who are about to be widows listening, listen up. There are widow rules. We met for coffee and she said, "You need to understand you're not allowed to say your loved one's name, except you should say their name. You should not smile too much, but you should smile because it's going to make people feel bad if you're not smiling. You need to make sure you don't make any changes for a year or more, but you need to make the changes you need to make. You need to definitely never be seen going out with anyone in public in your city for at least a year. If you are going to actually go do something with someone, go to another town." And I mean, there's about 10 of them altogether. And basically they are Whiplash City. You're not supposed to make other people feel bad, but you're not supposed to be too okay. And you're not supposed to have great boundaries because other people need to help you. And this is particular to widows. It also applies to women who lose children. There's a sort of a taking away the power of those folks in their grief process because they're supposed to need support. And they do need support, but they need to have support on their terms. So the Rebellious Widow is all about when you're a widow, you have to do it your way, or you're going to end up doing it other people's way, and you're going to give up how you do the rest of your life.
Wow. That sounds so confusing. All those rules, like mixed, like I like how you said whiplash.
Your head
Because
just
I'm like,
flies
it was like mixed messages.
to an extreme.
Oh my goodness.
To an
Yeah.
extreme. Yeah, the biggest part of grief, other than the saying goodbye and the finishing up, is setting boundaries. Because if you don't set boundaries with the folks around you and they love you, they don't do these things to harm you or to take over. they do it in the best interest, but most of the people setting the rules have never walked the walk. I've never met a widow who has tried to tell me what to do other than to not listen to other people telling me what to do. So widows know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
moms who've lost children, if they've worked through it, they know. Other people who've lost people do know. But when you lose a parent, it's a different loss. When you lose a sibling, it's a different loss. A best friend, it's an unmarked loss, and a different loss. People don't try to tell you what to do. But when you lose a parent, they try to tell you what to do with their estate more than anything else. When you lose a spouse, it's all about you got to be told what to do.
Yeah.
And that's just not fair. And it doesn't allow people to finish up because you can't finish if you're in the middle of trying to follow everyone else's stuff. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what the it's all about, being rebellious in a positive way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so is that who the book is intended for? Like kind of more
The-
strictly spouses or partners or?
I wrote it because while they were both dying, I wrote blogs. And I did that because I was already setting boundaries. I didn't really realize, even as a therapist, that's what I was doing. But I got tired of all the phone calls and the emails and the I have to know stuff. So I wrote a blog, not daily, but very frequently, about what was going on, how things were. I also wrote blogs that were educational based on things that had occurred. So things like what never to say to someone in the emergency room in the hospital when someone has dementia, what never to say to a grieving person because you will never be their friend again, right? Those things. But when I finished and when they were both gone and I sat back and looked at it, Stacy looked at those blogs and said, those blogs have helped a lot of people. One in particular that describes Lewy body dementia has been passed around the world, and it's helped, as far as I know, at least 9 people be diagnosed correctly who'd
Wow.
been going doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor, because that's a hard one to diagnose.
Mm.
And she said, you need to do something with it and you need to make it available. So there's bits of the blog woven in, but the nuts and bolts of it works for any kind of loss. It talks about what to do to get ready for someone's death, what the dying process looks, sounds, feels, smells like,
Mm.
what happens in the immediate moments after someone dies, how to deal with funeral stuff. Helps that I'm married to a funeral director. Um, and then also how to do the grief process in the way that I do, that's solution focused. It does have a bent towards intimate partners
Mm.
because I wrote it and it was written that way, but anybody could use it. Therapists can use it in helping their clients. Therapists can use it if they're expecting a loss of their own.
Mm.
And right now with COVID, anybody can use it because it describes what's happening to the person who's dying, and it describes what's happening to the person expecting the death. It's different right now with COVID, but it's applicable. And then the grief process is very much the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how your book is so like there's so many great takeaways, and it's so like applicable. Like even as I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it literally is like here's what happens, here's things to do, all different, things. And I'm like, this is so wonderful that I think like so many people could benefit from reading this. It's super
It's
informative
very
and helpful.
informative. I also
Yeah.
wrote a piece in there about hospice because so
Hmm.
many people are afraid of hospice. And right now, particularly with COVID, people who are sick and don't have COVID don't go to the hospital. They're trying so hard, but they're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they've been afraid of it since I started doing hospice. And I started doing not hospice, but basically end of life care when I was the first social worker for the Inland AIDS Project. And that was a very long time ago because we didn't even have AZT at that point, right? So everybody was dying rapidly for the
Yeah.
most part. And so it relates to, you need to call for help because hospice is going to be there to provide the support that you need. We're not going to kill you because we're hospice. We're going to support you, and you're actually going to live longer, according to the research,
Mm.
because your stress is off and your family's stress is off. Because if you need pain meds at 2 a.m, you will hear a knock on the door and there'll be someone from a delivery pharmacy with a little white bag for you. And you can't do that if you have to go to the pharmacy and they don't open till 9.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think that's an important topic in that there's maybe some misconceptions when it comes to hospice, or a lot of feelings that kind of, go into that. So, what's your take on that? And kind of maybe even some individuals and maybe struggling with, like, connecting with hospice, or maybe, kind of reaching out. What do you think about that?
Hospice is scary because people have associated it for decades with,
Mhm.
if I call hospice, that means my loved one's going to die. I'm giving up on them. Don't use those words, folks. If they are end of life, don't say those words to them, because they're tired. And people who are dying generally know that they're coming toward the end of life, even months out. But when they hear their family saying, don't give up, fight, 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 right? We do that with cancer in particular. We've got all these phrases and slogans around cancer. It's not giving up. It's, I can't do this anymore, and I need you to support me in that. So hospice, you can call yourself. You can actually call your local hospice. In California, if you're listening to this, we have lots of hospices. If you're in other states, you may only have one hospice in your area. But the hospice can send out someone to do an assessment for you. And then they can call your doctor and tell them it's time. If you tell your doctor I want hospice and they don't, you can go backdoor and get to it, and at least be told that you're appropriate or not appropriate at that point. Hospice is there for if you have a reasonable life expectation of 6 months or less, given where you are in your disease, in short form. So that if you live longer than 6 months, nobody's going to try and pull a plug, even though there are no plugs with hospice. And you can come off of hospice. We call that graduating. But hospice provides a doctor who makes home visits, a nurse case manager who knows what she's doing or what he's doing better than most nurses, because they have to operate independently and they make home visits. And then another nurse in general who's part of that team, and a home health aide who comes out and bathes you and cleans your nails and makes you feel, sparkly clean, even if you're in a bed. And they do it in a way that you don't feel like you're losing your dignity. Nobody wants that bed bath or that shower the first time, and then after that, oh, I can't wait for the next one. That felt so good, because they get massaged down with cream afterward, and a foot massage. It's feeling good again, even when you're sick.
Yeah.
And you get a chaplain for spiritual support if you want, and a social worker who can do the support stuff as well as take care of paperwork. It's the whole package. It's everything you need, and it comes to you.
Mhm.
They're not scary people.
Yeah.
Right?
It sounds so helpful in so many ways,
It is.
and then also helping the person's experience too in those moments. It just sounds like great support for the
It helps.
individual and for the family, actually.
It helps the person who's dying get ready to die. It
Yeah.
helps the family talk it through. I've done a lot of leading of, we do sometimes circles around the bed where everyone tells the person who's dying what they're always going to carry with them. And then they get to say goodbye. We do, if the person who's dying doesn't want to do it, you work with the family. I've sat on the floor with crayons with, 12 young grandchildren with grandpa in the bed, and we've drawn pictures to tell him what we'll never forget about him and share them with him. When I was in Florida, we had a school teacher who died, and she was that teacher in that elementary school. I think it was like second grade, third grade, something. And that school arranged to bring all the kids to the mortuary the night of her visitation, but they got there 2 hours early. And I met them there with crayons and pens and paper. And we sat not right in front of the casket, but not too far from it. And the kids who wanted to look at it could, and the kids who didn't stayed back. And we wrote letters or drew pictures. And some of the kids went and tucked them in with her. And some of them had their little friends do it, and some of them had me do it. And then they shook the family's hand and told them thank you for their teacher. And they went home. That normalized death for them, and it let them say goodbye. And hospice is that. If you've got a good hospice, they will go above and beyond. In normal times, COVID, it's a little different. But even with hospice, even with COVID, they will go above and beyond to make that dying process as okay as it can be.
Yeah, that's
It's
wonderful.
okay that someone's dying. One of my favorite hospice nurses, Jenny, said to me, because I said, this is just too hard. Casper's death was very difficult. Lewy body dementia at the end is very difficult. So this is really, really hard. I've done this before. This is hard. She said, this is when you kind of look at it as, this is what we got. So this is what we got to do with it. and we're just going to do
Yeah,
what we can with it. And that's
definitely.
hospice.
That's wonderful. Jill, I'm going to pause you for 1 minute. The joys of working from home.
Right?
I can hear Roomba turning on in the downstairs. Sorry, so I'm going to text someone to say, please
Turn
tell
off the Roomba.
Roomba to go home. Turn off Roomba. I know the closer he gets to the stairs, it's going to get louder.
We had a Roomba at our office. I think we still do. I just haven't been there. And when Adele went to work with us, she would get trapped because Sherry set it off at 7 p.m. And if I was working late, Adele would wander the office and I'd find her under a table with Roomba coming after her. She hated Roomba.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is so funny. Okay, so hopefully that'll turn off soon. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, going back to what you're saying, that's amazing though. That was what was facilitated for those kids. I think, and how powerful that is, because when it comes to kids and like death and talking about it, not everyone, they don't always get that opportunity sometimes,
Right.
And so the fact that they got to be a part of that experience and do that is like amazing. Actually.
It is. And the book has some things about kids in it because I had kids who were young teens and then older teens when both of my wives died, since they died 3.5 years apart. And so we had to get them ready. So it's got some practical boots on the ground, how to make sure that if someone is dying in your house and you've got kids too, like assign a grown-up to each of the kids that they trust, so that you can put all your focus on the person who's dying. And they also have someone who will catch them if they don't come to you. Right. If one of them splits and goes someplace, somebody else follows them. Right.
Yeah.
And how to get them ready for that.
Yeah. That's amazing, because sometimes too, like there's so much like, gotta, keep it together, gotta juggle all these things, so much responsibility, keep doing what I'm doing and then more. And so I like that. It's almost like some people feel like they need permission too, in some ways. And it's like, no, this would be so helpful. Like, it's okay. This is helpful for you and your self-care too.
The person is going to die no matter what you do. And I don't mean to sound crass, but there was no way out. Linda was going to die. Casper was going to die. There was no way out of this one. So you have to get ready. And if you take everything on, you just can't do it all. I was working full time. When Casper died, I was working full time for hospice and doing private practice in the evenings and weekends. And I had teenagers. So you got to have help. I assigned telephone calls to one person. I assigned the kitchen to somebody else. Each adult knew which kid was theirs for each death. There was a plan for after they died that the kids could be there, and I wanted the kids there. And there were lots of people there. But then afterward, they go out for ice cream because their kids don't need to see the image of someone they love being put on a mortuary cot and being taken out of the house. I'm okay with it, but it's not a great image for kids. And when I work with kids who've lost someone, that's an image that's indelible that they can't get out. Right. So you got to have all the things, and you got to have help. You have got to have a tribe or a team when someone you love is dying.
Yeah.
And if you know someone who's dying, make sure you're part of that team. Even with COVID, you can do it from outside.
Yeah. And I wonder too, if even for the loved ones or friends or, the support community, if it would also help to know, like, if it's like, okay, I know this particular task or this particular thing would be helpful, because I wonder if some people kind of maybe are unsure, like how to help or what,
Right.
what it is that they could do. I always hear like, which I've heard a lot about, like, it's not so much the helpful thing to say, but like, oh, let me know if you need anything.
Oh, those are the worst words in the world.
But and so it's kind of, and even through that, it's like they're saying like, I don't really know like what, to do.
What I need is someone to bring me matzo ball soup.
Yeah.
Right. There's a therapist who does amazing work, but she also makes amazing matzo ball soup. So I called Nicole and said, I need the matzo ball. And she brought it. And I need someone to come run laundry, because there's a lot of laundry when someone's dying, especially if people are there. When I realized we were end of life for both of them, we got on Craigslist and found newer comfy couches and chairs that were the right height for a hospital bed, so
Oh,
that Linda died in our living room. People gathered in the living room. If you're reaching up, I mean, this really is nuts and bolts. You're going to hurt your shoulder. I have
yeah.
permanent damage to one shoulder now. So you want to make sure you've got furniture that's the right height. It's got stuff in there, particularly for intimate partners, in that lots of hospices, most hospices, don't even think about making sure that intimate partners are still connected at end of
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
They now have gigantic hospital beds you can have at home, but they're extremely expensive, so nobody carries them.
Mm.
They're called family beds. So the hospice that I was affiliated with, who was taking care of Casper looked at them and said, I can't sleep in our bed much longer, and I know it. I have to be able to hold Jill.
Mm.
And so we got the zip ties out, and we zip tied the 2 foots of the beds together,
Yeah.
and we put a piece of plywood underneath, and then we brought the mattresses together. That way, on bad nights, I could pull that side of the bed up on her side, because Lewy body
Mm.
can actually cause such extreme agitation you can be injured.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what Lewy body is known for. You can really be severely injured by the person who has it, and they don't know it. That's why Robin Williams was sleeping in a different room, because you thrash and you punch and you can't tell the difference between dream
Oh,
and not dream. And sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's really violent. So there were days, and she also would try to jump out of bed. So there were times you pull the bed up, and there were other times she could really just reach over and we could hold each other. And we did that up until probably the last week she was alive. Right? What a gift.
yeah.
I did a
Yeah.
survey while I was working on other things, including this book, this with hospice staff, therapists, grief providers, and I asked just a few questions, and then I put it out to the widow community too, because when you're a widow, you get to go in all the communities and grief online. So I'm in all the communities, and I asked permission, and I said, I just want to know, for those of you who are the providers, do you ever talk about intimacy
Mm.
with end of life couples? Do you ever
Mm.
try to foster that for them?
Mm.
Do you even acknowledge that this is more than just a caregiver situation anymore? And for the grief providers and the therapists who aren't grief providers, do you bring it up? Do you ask that person who's just lost an intimate partner how hard it is to not have someone to sleep next to hold, to kiss, to snuggle, to do all the things that are part of an intimate relationship? 100% of the time on both of them said no.
Mm.
100%. And 100% of the widows said, I wish someone would bring it up.
Yeah.
And most of them said, my partner and I talked about it before their death, but we were embarrassed and ashamed because people are going to think it's weird that someone's dying and we still want to be intimate in some way.
Mm.
And the therapist said, no, if they bring it up, I'll be okay with it. But, I'm embarrassed to bring it up. Clue one, people who are losing their partner or people who've lost one are never going to bring it up. But the minute you give them permission,
Yeah.
oh, it's over. It all comes flying out because you're probably the only person they can talk about it with.
Right. Right. And as
You're,
and as therapists too, our presence is that, where people come in and maybe they talk about things or they share things that they don't feel so comfortable talking about or sharing anywhere else, so I could see how if we open up that door,
right.
and bring it up, I I can't even imagine how healing or just like that release and just being like, oh good, oh great, now I could talk about this, if I
Absolutely.
that.
Right.
Mhm.
Just before COVID hit, I did a presentation in West Hollywood at a thing called Camp Widow, which is nationwide. And they do 2 standard ones every year, East Coast, West Coast, but then they also do pop-ups. And that particular year, they were doing a pop-up for the LGBTQ community. And
Mm.
so I called them and said, I just heard about you. Do you want someone to come talk about intimacy and loss? And they're like, oh my God, we've been trying to find someone for years to do this topic. And nobody will because it's taboo. Even in that community, it's taboo. And I walked into the
Mm.
room and it was packed. There were maybe 50 people there. There were other groups going on. You could hear them. And, there was some crying and there was sadness because they were talking about important stuff. But I walked in, they didn't know me. They just saw the title of my talk and I got a standing ovation as I walked in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I said, what is that for? And one guy said, we never get to talk about this. If we bring it up to our friends, they act like we're, not caring about the person who died. If we talk about this with our therapist, they look at us like we're crazy. We should be grieving, not thinking about that. So that was also part of the Rebellious Widow, is we need to talk about the fact
Yeah.
that when an intimate partner dies, there's a second loss, which is the intimacy loss. And it's separate and apart from the death.
Yeah. And the relationship, and we know this in couples work too, that attachment and that bond is huge. And you picture too, like as you described too, when you both were like sleeping in the same bed, like if you're with someone for so long, and then for that not to happen anymore, that's another loss. And that you could feel that, when you're not with them anymore, whether it's to be there in case you might be helpful, or just, to snuggle or to hold their hand,
Right.
or something. That's so huge.
It's absolutely huge, which is why I said, if
Mm.
someone's going to die in your house, get the right furniture, right? Because you need to, even if it's your mom, you want to be able to, slide your arm under her head on a bad day and, stroke her face and, say, I'm here for you and I'm going to miss you, but I'm going to be okay. You can't do that if you're 6 inches below them and
Yeah.
your shoulder is screaming in pain. There is a lot of just practical stuff that comes with taking care of someone who's dying.
Yeah.
You got to make sure that the house is taken care of and you're eating and
Mm-hmm.
you're getting a cat nap here and there. I'm not going to tell you to sleep normally, because you're not gonna, but that kind of thing. So it's
Definitely.
got that stuff in there. But when you are talking to someone, if you are a therapist or a BFF or a chaplain or a minister or anybody, ask them what it's like. What is it like to wake up in the morning and realize that they're dead all over again?
Mm.
That's the first thing that a widow or widower realizes. And it's for the first 2, 3, 4 months. That's an every single morning experience. And
Yeah.
you don't have that experience if your mom died.
Mm.
Because, when you're our age, you don't wake up with your mom next to you, I
Mm.
hope.
Mm.
Right? It's similar for parents of small children who have died, because their
Right.
first thought when they wake up in the morning is go check.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So their first thing is the jolt up. I didn't hear the alarm go off to go do the blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
So it's similar. So we need to be able to identify with those moments with them and bring those moments up. You can use humor. Humor is awesome to do this stuff. I'm not going to
Humor
use
is
some of that
important.
humor. It can be a little crass. I won't share it on your show, but you can use some of those crass things if you've got a good relationship with your client,
Mm.
and they will laugh and they'll say, "Oh, you're so right." Right. So
Mm.
and then they will bring it up easily,
Yeah.
and you can talk about the stuff. And some of it's just stuff that happened during the dying process that they don't feel comfortable bringing up with someone because they think you don't know.
Mm.
But if you can bring up how hard it is to, change a diaper or empty a catheter, I know that's not normal therapy talk or even friend talk, but it is when you've got someone who's had someone die.
Got it. Yeah.
So give them permission to talk about it. And then it's
Definitely.
less scary for you, because there is nobody in this planet who's not going to have someone love die. Everybody experiences this kind of loss.
Yeah.
How comfy we
Yeah.
are with it is another thing entirely.
Right. Which, shifting gears a little,
Yeah.
to one final topic, especially with COVID, right? And two, like it's brought up a lot of thoughts about death or lack preparation or not, So how do you feel about like paperwork, more like advanced directives and like, that whole
I totally believe in all of it. Right? Because first of all, anyone listening to this, even if you're just sitting in the car, raise your hand if you do not have your advanced directives and your will and your life
Mm.
insurance and your funeral
Mhm.
in place.
Yeah.
99% of the people listening are going to say, "Oh, I meant to do that." Right? You got to do it, folks. You need to have, and then once you do it, you have to tell people about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't help to make plans if nobody knows what your plans are. If you want, I mean, it's something basic. If you want cremation and the family wants burial, you better go make your plans, because unless you put them in writing and sign for it, they're going to do what they're going to do. More importantly, if you don't want to be resuscitated, then you need to tell your family you don't want to be resuscitated. And you better have it in writing.
Yeah.
And if you have someone who is ill or of an age where they should have these things in place no matter what, you better have it in writing on a regular document, a medical document, either a physician's order regarding life-sustaining treatment, which is a POLST, which is co-signed by a doctor, or a little less is a DNR or a 5 wishes. There are lots of documents. I have them listed. There are other books. There's one book out called What to Do If I'm Dead, but it's also got things about advanced directives in it. You need to have those things done. They need to be someplace locatable. If someone is terminally ill, you keep them in the car with you too, in case you have to meet them at the hospital because someone panics. But you need to have those things done. And that means you have to consider it. Do I want to be a donor? If I want to be a donor, how much do I want to be a donor? Because there's more to being a donor than most people think. Do I want to be on life support? If I'm on life support, do I understand that means someone's going to have to take me off life support at some point? And do I want that to be, do I want my family to have to make that decision? Because only the family can make the decision. Who's going to take care of my estate? And don't make it a committee, because committees don't get along. They don't. You may think your kids are going to get along like a fabulous band. Someone's going to be mad. Someone's going to have their feelings hurt. Someone's going to still be saying this can't be real. And nobody's going to get along, and it's going to end up with a lawyer. So make the plans and tell them, and make one person in charge. But make sure you've got everything in writing.
Yeah.
And if make the funeral plans. I have a daughter who's not really a daughter, Katrina, and we lost her mom on New Year's Day of 2020. How's that for entering 2020, right? She pre-planned everything. And I was there at the time she died. I was there with her for that last few days, pretty much around the clock. And she said, okay, in this colored folder, in this cabinet, under this line, you will find everything. And I pulled it out. She had what passages she wanted read. She had why she wanted them read. She had a commentary for the minister. She had her obituary written. She had the music, and she had releases from all of the companies to use the music, even though you don't need them for funerals. She had everything planned. She had the coordinates for where she wanted her ashes scattered.
Wow.
Because she was an outdoorsy person and she loved exploring the Western United States. She knew which 3 places she was going to go, right? That's going to happen next year. That meant that her daughter, who'd already lost her dad at a young age and now lost her mom, at 30, that meant her daughter didn't have to make any plans. I could put them into play. All I had to do was go buy the sandwiches and the paper products and make sure that we had things ready to go as wished at church. It's a gift when you do those things.
Yeah.
Right? And you better believe that if I have a church service, it's going to start with what it doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And someone's going to say, apparently somebody finally got her.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Right?
It's important. And even as you explained, what Katrina's mother did, I could see how too, it's like in some ways, like that must be empowering too, to be able to prepare that, because I think that's something like people would probably think about anyway. Like, what's this, what would this
They
look like?
try not
So
to,
then
they
being able
defend
to,
against it.
but then to put
Right?
it in plans,
It's
that's
fabulous.
yeah.
Linda was only bedbound for a week. She had pulmonary fibrosis. When she died, she had about 3% of her lungs left. But she was an ER nurse and she was tough as nails, and she kept going and going. And we had the hospital bed for 2 months, and she said, put it away, I don't want to see it. I literally put it in the living room and put the couch against it, and we put something over it and hid the hospital bed. And then one day she said, I think I'm going to go try that out. And then she never got out of it again. But it was only 1 week. During that week, she went through all of our pictures. She picked all the pictures for her memorial video. She pissed off her family too, because she picked out ones of her with our kids more than anything else, because it was for them. It was their funeral, right? She wrote her own obituary with my business partner, Sherry Shockey Pope, and with my BFF, Wendy Marshall. She put together what she wanted in music. She agreed that I could use the Navy hymn because she was a disabled Navy vet, and that we were going to end with Take Me Out to the Ball Game, right? Because she was a diehard Angels fan, right? She designed all of it. She made sure everything was in there the way she wanted it. She even in the obituary demanded that nobody wear black because she thought that that looked too somber. She wanted either Angels gear or white or colorful. And so we did that, and the whole family, I went out and got Angel shirts and had all of our roles in her life. So mine said #1 Coacher fan, because we called her Coacher. The kids had #1, 2, and 3 daughter, right? Because we wanted to celebrate her. She designed that. She died knowing she had left everything in place. It made it easier for her to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
She also left me with a 3-page bucket list, which wasn't very nice, but it's all done.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yes. I danced when the last kid graduated because that was the last thing I had to do.
Yeah.
Make sure they all graduate. So, yeah. I did.
Well, before we wrap up, anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention?
I just want everyone to be thinking about making sure you've got your stuff in place. You get comfy with hospice. And I would love to see everyone think a little bit more about what they can do for folks if they are facing losses right now, especially with COVID.
Yeah.
And mind your words, right? There is a chapter in there about what not to say. Don't say the things. Don't say they're in a better place. Don't say, aren't you glad it's over? Don't say God wanted another angel. Don't do that, because someone who's just had someone die would rather have your person have become an angel, not their person have become an angel, to be quite frank, if we're going to pick out angels. So think before you speak, but show up. If you're the matzo ball soup maker, leave it on the doorstep. And if you're going to make a hot plate, put it in a tinfoil dish, because nobody wants to have to figure out whose crock pot they have, right? I know that's sort of simple. And as a therapist, make sure you're listening. And you're listening more than you're talking when someone comes in after a loss. Let them tell their story. Let them talk about what traumatized them during the loss process. Let them tell you what they miss about their person. Let them laugh about the stupid stuff people have said. You're the only person they can tell this to, and you're probably the only person they can complain about their relatives to. So make sure they know that your door or your screen are secure, and they can tell you all the stuff, because sometimes all you are is just an absorber of all the stuff. And that's a really important role.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that. And where could people purchase your book? Where could they find it?
Well, it is on Amazon, like the whole planet is on Amazon. It's also at Barnes and Noble. It can also be ordered at your store, at your regular bookstore. So if you have a local bookstore that's still open, I would ask everyone to go in and ask for it. They can order it in. It might take a little longer, but let's support our local bookstores. Let's do that. And you can also get it at jilljohnsonyoung.com, which is where I also have classes that I teach, and it's got lots of resources. So it's there if you need to know about any kind of loss or any kind of dementia. There's a page for that. So yeah, go there. But truly, I'd love to see people order it from the bookstores so we can support those local booksellers. They've been through a lot this last year, and we need to do what we can for them.
Definitely. I did, they call it like a special order from I found like a local bookstore here in Orange County. I was super excited. And they were more than happy. I sent them like an email even, and they're like, yeah, so they were so welcoming to that. And they really, really appreciated that. So yeah, the local bookstores right now could use a lot of support. So what I'll do is I'll put your website on the podcast website, booksbetweensessions.com, and then also all your like social media handles I could put that
Yes.
on there too. So that's easily accessible. Instagram, all the different Facebook handles that you have.
I have a ton. I'm so sorry. And I also have a rebelliousswidow.com page.
Yeah, and so I'll
there
put
is
that.
only one Rebellious Widow.
Yeah, so I'll put that. That way it's easily clickable, and that they can find it. Our listeners can find it easily. Okay.
Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. I hope people read it. It's practical.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure. And forgot to mention this to the listeners. If you haven't already, Jill is a returning guest. So back in the spring, I believe, we did an episode for one of her other books, Your Own Path Through Grief.
Your grief.
That
That's
was
the
title.
workbook. Yeah.
That's the workbook, which is also amazing. So if you have some time as well, definitely listen to that episode and check out that workbook too. Okay.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry the dogs are barking.
That's okay. Sorry about Roomba, which I could hear it. It didn't turn
I
off. And
I can definitely hear the dogs.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, the joys of
yes, working from home.
life. Work from home life. Well, take care. Okay.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem. Bye.